Auckland. Only metropolis in New Zealand, it is the cultural flagship of the most isolated country in the world. The unique geography of this volcanic city has somewhat delayed its development, but a third of the national population now lives here, making it by far the largest city on this secluded island.
Auckland tends to grow in little booms followed by very flat periods. It was really after the Second World War that the next development of Auckland began, and that was an entirely auto-dependent structure.
But life at the far end of the world has good sides, especially when it comes with a breathtaking setting you're likely to find in very few places around the globe.
People often come at 6 in the morning to surf, or in the evening after work if they can. It's just a 30-minute drive to the beach and the surfing.
Established on mountainous terrain, Auckland has very little space to spare. This is why locals have turned to the ocean, a vast playground at the heart of local life.
I've never found a city that has the same sort of access to this many islands.
Strangely, Auckland doesn't feel isolated. This haven of peace, this island of fun in the middle of pretty much nowhere, definitely has an appeal of its own. The European settlers that founded Auckland in 1840 were preceded by the Maori people, who thrived in this paradise of fertile land. But the colonial development that followed prioritized an urban model, far from nature's path. Urban planners are now rethinking the city, bringing back the Maori way of doing things in communion with the environment.
The specialty about Auckland is the isthmus, which is a very close connection between the East Coast and the West Coast. And they get as close as a few hundred meters in this area over there. So, and the indigenous tribe, when they found out that they had an easy connection from the west to the east, this was a strategic point that was of highest interest. Before the white settlers came here in the late 18th, early 19th century, it was also a place where Maori tribes used to settle in. And so it's a lovely place. It has a lot of variety.
Has it always been very hard to get here?
Yes, until fairly recently. I think it was the 1960s when the first regular jet plane-driven connection with the rest of the world happened. Before that, it was 6 weeks, 8 weeks seafaring to reach Europe. So it was a very, very remote place, very isolated, and this is still ingrained in the whole culture of this place. So New Zealanders are very much their own people, so they have their own approach to everything, and they are proud of that.
So aren't you do this every day?
Yes, this is my favorite time of the day.
I'm sure.
No, it's after several decades of commuting by underground in Europe, this is as good as it can be. So I don't sit in a car on a congested motorway. I just sit here gazing over the water, enjoying the sunrise. In the peak hour, this ferry is always full. And it's a kind of social hub as well. So you meet people. I met some people that I work with now.
How is the water accessible to Aucklanders?
To Aucklanders in the CBD, it is almost not accessible. There's one spot which has been created over the last 2 years there where the water is accessible, but that's basically it. It's fenced off because of health and safety reasons, of course, but it is not accessible. So Aucklanders love the water, Aucklanders live by the water, on the water almost, but they can only look at the water. This is now the Vineyard Quarter over there, which will be the next urban laboratory for the next, say, 10, 20 years. So it's the new turn of Auckland towards the water. So there's a new attraction that this waterfront has to large corporates and also to the people. And last year, this North Wharf environment opened, and it's a big success. In terms of the abilities that Auckland has, there's a huge potential. And if this will be successful, then it will be a totally new life in Auckland. And also, it will create a much more closer connection of Aucklanders with the water. This is one of the newly created places here where Aucklanders really can access the water.
We can actually go down and
We
touch
can
the
go
water.
down, touch the water, you can swim. I saw people swimming here. It's just a marvelous place. So imagine you are here on a nice Friday night in summer and having a little sundowner here, a glass of Chardonnay.
Oh, it's lovely.
It is. It's summer, almost.
It's summer.
Our mayor here in Auckland has said he wants to make Auckland the most livable city in the world. I think we are currently in the top 5 or so. And we have a proper chance to resolve this, but we should do it with a particular focus on sustainability. So because livability and a clean environment, a healthy environment, and a maritime lifestyle, which is what this place is about, go together. And if we can amalgamate this into one project, we can do it.
So sustainability is one thing, but it seems that Auckland hasn't even taken advantage of how wonderful this nature is.
There is not the right recognition or acknowledgement that this city is placed in one of the most beautiful spots on this planet. Maori have a belief that sees divine aspects and features of landscape, in hilltops, in large trees, in bays, in certain places. We always are deeply involved with the local tribes to find out how they read the landscape, how they feel the landscape, how they value the landscape. And then we translate this into something which is accessible for the Western mind. So this is a kind of mutual give and take, very respectful, and it's driven by learning, and it values that the Maoris run this place for 800 years now, and we are their guests, basically. There is so much potential inherent in this place, this tension between the open water and the city, tides, rhythms, all these aspects that we have closely connected with the water have so much potential that we can develop in urban design, in architecture, and is always related to the well-being of the people. And then we will have great lives.
And then it'll be the best place to live on Earth.
Absolutely.
Despite a lush natural setting, Auckland was developed like many North American cities, around the creation of suburbs and the use of cars.
Maori were here first. They came in the last, 1,500 years and populated this land. They took to it immediately. They call it Tamaki Makaurau, which means Isthmus of a Thousand Lovers, which is a much more poetic name than Auckland, I can tell you that. Till the middle of the 20th century, New Zealand had 4 cities of about the same size. Dunedin was our first big city, in fact, but the history of post-colonial New Zealand is a gradual move north, and now Auckland is substantially bigger than anywhere else in New Zealand, 1.5 million people, 3 times bigger than the next city. So New Zealand really has a primary city. It has one city of scale, and this is it.
How
did this city develop?
First through pastoral farming, spreading out from the port, which is really the reason the city is here. This port on the Waitemata harbour on the east side, the Pacific coast. And then farmland spread out, and slowly the farmland got more inhabited as the population grew. These are all the tram-built suburbs. So the tram lines radiated out of downtown from the port, from Queen Street, out into these areas and built these medium density places with a high degree of walkability, because you've got to be able to walk to the tram, right? So the arterial roads had the trams on them, and they all had a little group of shops and some employment, but they were still generally about getting into the city and the port.
Did the city evolve gradually, or was it a boom after the Second World War?
Auckland tends to grow in little booms followed by very flat periods. Physically, we've tended to develop down the ridges, or where it's easy to put a transport link, like first railways and then roads, and then we spread out from that. It was really after the Second World War that the next development of Auckland began, and that was an entirely auto-dependent structure decision. They ripped up the tram tracks in the mid-50s, which reduced Auckland from having the highest level of public transport use in the Western world to one of the lowest a couple of decades later. We tried to be California.
You tried to be California?
Yeah, we rammed motorways through the old Victorian suburbs in the city. It was called slum clearance. We completely devastated whole neighbourhoods, cut off the city from its inner suburbs. What that does is you're prioritising people who live further out over the people who live close by. In Auckland, we need to invest in the other structures so there's still efficient systems of movement, which we have not invested in for 60 years. So there is a big debate about building a metro and expanding all the other modes other than driving. Walking, cycling, ferries, making the buses more efficient, giving them more road space, the same argument everywhere.
I haven't seen many bikes here.
No, it's a pretty suicidal place to ride a bicycle. That's basically the problem. The problem is the roads are not designed for it. You are thrown in either with buses or with general traffic, and it's essentially quite a dangerous activity.
A tall Kiwi.
A new urban model is now rejuvenating Auckland. Unlike its car-oriented past, the city is now focusing on pedestrians and restructuring public transit.
Here we are, we're outside Britomart Station, which in fact this building was a post office. The trains used to come to this point, and then they were pushed further away in the 20s and 30s. This is a very important hub for Auckland. I mean, there's the ferry building, a lot of ferries arrive there, and as you can see, a lot of buses. Now, because we haven't invested in specific transport structures, we have to rely on buses. Buses do the heavy lifting in Auckland. The argument goes, we have roads, let's just put buses on them. But of course, the buses then either move very slowly on the roads, they're stuck in other traffic, or in fact, they contribute to the congestion for the other traffic. Buses are important, but they're going to need their own right-of-ways. The key thing to understand about this station is the trains come here and they stop. This is like a big intercity station, say like Gare du Nord or Waterloo in London, right? It's really based on the intercity model, getting from A to B and stopping at this point. Whereas the plan that the city wants to advance with is a thing called the City Rail Link, which will through-route the trains from here and join them up with another line on the other side. And immediately, with 3 new underground stations, we have a metro. And Auckland it's a much less bossy system. You're not saying everybody comes to this singularity, this downtown point, but rather they will go on various points along the way.
Good example of revitalization.
Yeah, this is all new, and this is a direct result of the transit centre. Under here are the trains, and that means there's a lot of people. Traffic volumes have dropped. However, the businesses have gone up 400%. This is the increase in land value and productivity that investment in transit brings to a city, because every transit user is a walker. We won't be able to throw away, and nor should we, throw away the totality of the driving culture. But we are having a little cultural revolution.
Auckland's priorities have obviously changed over time, but its unique geography remains a challenge. Like many Neo-Aucklanders, Loïc was attracted by the splendor of the city and its one-of-a-kind quality of life.
Auckland is very big. I think this is one of the largest cities in the world in terms of area. But it isn't a very dense city, as you can see here. We have a garden and we don't see the neighbors, and most people have a large garden.
C'est ça, c'est incroyable. Vous êtes en plein milieu d'une forêt tropicale.
We live in a subtropical climate with all the birds. We have National Geographic right here. We're surrounded by wildlife, and we're 15 minutes from the beach. You can go backpacking or hiking anywhere quite easily. Walk 5 minutes to the right, 5 minutes to the left, and you're on a trail.
With hundreds of kilometers of coastline, beaches define Auckland. And this impressive access to water has made it a hub of surfing. But contrary to the competitive Californian spirit, Auckland is about enjoying nature more than anything else.
Auckland is actually built on a volcanic zone. There are about 50 volcanoes in or around the city, and there's water on both sides. And it's this proximity to water that gives it all of its charm. But the volcanoes are no longer active, so you don't have to worry about eruptions. There are risks of earthquakes, however, but very small risks. For people, it all means living with nature. There are many places like Rangitoto, the youngest volcano, where you can walk all the way to the top. People can also go to Mount Eden and Mount Albert, which are all part of Auckland. All of this is an important part of people's lives here. Great for family outings. It's definitely the city's charm.
Et les inondations, est-ce que c'est un problème ici?
There aren't that many floods, but storms will create landslides in isolated regions. The erosion is a major problem and a big concern. People see more of their land being taken away with each storm. Land here is pretty expensive, and it holds emotion and history, especially for people who grew up here. They've tried to maintain the dunes through revegetation. And there are places where they've tried something called replenishment. Every year they bring in new sand, or they take sand from one area of the beach and bring it elsewhere, or they build walls with rocks. I even heard that there's a plan to build an artificial reef. It's a project worth $15 million or so, just to give you an idea of the cost of all these things. There's also the risk of tsunamis, but it's less important here than elsewhere in New Zealand. But it's true that Auckland is protected by its geography. The Great Barrier Island, which is quite exposed to tsunamis, protects Auckland. There's also the Hauraki Gulf, which protects the whole coast.
Qu'est-ce que c'est leurs plus grandes inquiétudes?
Quite frankly, I don't feel that the Kiwis are worried at all.
Ben voilà.
People here are extremely relaxed. I think the Maori heritage allows people to live with nature and pushes them to have a respect for the environment in general. We can safely say that surfing is a part of everyday life in this city. It's a city of 1.5 million inhabitants. People often come at 6 in the morning to surf, or in the evening after work if they can. It's just a 30-minute drive to the beach and the surfing. And it isn't very crowded, and it's still quite reasonable. We can still find isolated places where we can surf alone. In general, people are so laid back. They live a good life, so there isn't this tension you'll usually find in the water between surfers.
J'ai hâte de voir ça. Tu vas voir comment je vais mettre de la compétition dans l'eau, moi.
At one point, you'll have to get up, push with your arms, and... Well, that's it. Everything should be just fine.
Aucklanders are very close to nature and the sports that come with it. Their adventure-driven lifestyle has created a need for eccentric challenges and a desire to come up with new and exciting things, like bungee jumping. Invented here, on this bridge, the whole bungee thing isn't for everyone.
1, 2, 3.
Sailing, on the other hand, has been deeply rooted in daily life for several generations.
There is that statistic that Auckland has the highest boat ownership per capita of anyone in the world. And I think the way that balances out is between us, I don't know how many boats we have. I think I've got 5 boats and 3 dinghies, 6 boats and 3 dinghies, and you've got
9 or 10, I think. Yeah. So it probably skews the statistic.
Yeah. So we cover 20 families between the two of us.
These suburbs and the North Shore suburbs and the eastern bays, it's a lot about the beaches and the boats and being in the water. And certainly once you get out in the Gulf, you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful playground.
Is it the best way to get away?
Well, there's 2 versions of it, right? You know, there's the sailing where you go out and you just relax and everything's sort of okay because you're out sailing. And then there's the small boat racing that we do too. And that, you just have to focus on so hard on sailing, physically and emotionally and intellectually, that there's no room for anything else.
Yeah. And it's certainly a bonus starting from here for going for a cruise, you know, on a Friday night and sailing out underneath the harbour bridge that is chocker with stalled traffic, and you're just calmly on your way without going tired.
With your wine and your pizza and the
okay.
kids reading books and some music, and you're on holiday, and an hour later we're moored at Rangitoto. And
The kids learn from their parents usually?
a mixture, really. There's a sailing club over here we belong to. I learnt at the sailing club on the wharf over there. There's one in Westhaven. There's sort of, I don't know, half a dozen more that way. Another one up over there. So there's lots of clubs. And if people want to race, they really learn from clubs, and that gives them competition with other kids. There was a tradition here of fishing from sailing boats that fed into racing. You still have a mullet boat, which were fishing boats in the 1870s, 1880s, and they used to hoist up lots and lots of sail and race back to the market, and that became recreational racing, which was highly competitive. When you look at 19th century photos of Auckland, you have Māori waka races going down the harbour, and you have the gentleman yacht races side by side. So that's a really lovely tradition.
Everybody had a boat in the backyard that they were building or fixing up. I used to sort of navigate as a teenager by not so much streets, but, you know, what boat was in what front yard. And, you know, it got a bit tricky when somebody finished their boat and put it in the water, and that reference changed, but that used to be the case. We've got a culture from the 60s of designing and building plywood boats, and they were the sort of everyman's boat that everybody could build. They weren't sophisticated, but they were fast.
Yeah.
And that has changed. It's about sections, house sites becoming smaller, and there's not that room to build the boat in the backyard. And, you know, time and lots of other opportunities, really, I think.
It's become a little bit more exclusive, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
Is Auckland the best sailing city?
It is. I mean, I've lived and sailed in a number of cities, and I've never found a city that has the same sort of access to this many islands, this many anchorages, so close to Auckland. We can get from our mooring to an overnight sheltered anchorage in an island you can't see the Sky Tower from in an hour and a half. And then from there, there's a string of other islands. You know, you can, as far as Great Barrier, which is about a 10-hour sail, or the Bay of Islands, which, you know, you're the record's 6 hours, but we take 3 days to get there with the kids and stopping at other islands on the way. I mean, out here in the Gulf, there are dozens of little islands that you can overnight at or day trip to. And so, you know, there's this sort of irony that we're seen as a small island in the South Pacific, but for us to get away, we go away each weekend to smaller islands. So there seems to be this New Zealand thing of a quest for ever smaller islands. I think the big dream for most yacht owners is sailing to Pacific Islands,
Absolutely.
to Cook Islands, Tonga.
And I think, you know, having experienced it, it's really the only way to arrive at an island is from the sea, by boat. You know, flying is very convenient, but it's not the same sense of voyage or adventure or achievement.
Whether it's sailing or driving away, is it normal for Aucklanders to get away from the city during the weekends?
Yeah. You know, there's a tradition of owning what we call a batch in the North Island or a crib in the South Island, which is a holiday home, and that's sort of been the traditional Kiwi dream.
Thank you for the amazing outing.
Oh, it's a good any excuse to come out, actually.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
Yeah.
With its breathtaking beaches and ubiquitous sailboats, Auckland is no longer the secret it once was. Over the course of 15 years, the city has seen a 25% population increase and is now home to the largest Polynesian population in the world. But it's the Asian community that will soon become the majority.
Otara is part of South Auckland. It's quite an impoverished area, so that it's not very wealthy. It has the largest Maori and Pacific population, and then it has quite a large Asian population. So it reflects the various layers of migration to Auckland.
Auckland hasn't always been that diverse.
No. Most of the migrants to New Zealand came from Britain and Ireland, and so from 1840 was the Treaty of Waitangi, which is really the foundation of New Zealand, and for most of the next 150, 160 years, nearly all of our migrants, like 90% or more, came from Britain and Ireland. And then in the 1960s, the first migrants came from the Pacific, Samoa, Tonga, Cook Islands, Niue, Tokelau, and more recently Fiji. And then in the 1990s, we changed and adopted a new immigration policy, and so the migrants came from Asia. So this year, about half of the migrants will come from Britain, still important, China and India, and then the Philippines.
This market is actually like Auckland, maybe.
Yes, this is a microcosm of Auckland.
Right.
All the major ethnic groups and immigrant groups are represented here, that's right, yeah.
Everyone here in New Zealand is an immigrant.
Yes.
Even the Maoris.
Yes, they did. They just came 1,000 years earlier than anybody else, yes. And that point's been made. But what we tend to do is describe people as tangata whenua, people of the land, which are Māori, and tangata tiriti, people of the treaty. So the treaty recognised that others would come to New Zealand, and so what we need to do is say that they also deserve respect and they've come here to contribute as well. But I think the condition of coming here is that they respect the indigenous people of the land in some way. Okay. When I was growing up, Māori weren't respected in the way they should have been.
Same with my father.
Yeah, same with your dad.
When my father went to school, when he was a child, they spoke Māori at home, and when they went to school, they would get the strap for speaking Māori, so they had to learn how to speak English. So for a period there, they tried to cut it off so that there would be no more Māori left, but our people just kept it going, and they'll always keep it going. And now it's respected. Now it's very much respected here in this country.
And the government, by the 80s, had begun to recognise Māori, so the Treaty of Waitangi was part of our law. The speaking of Māori is an official language of New Zealand.
Yeah.
And there's a whole education system which goes from Kohangareo, which is the preschool, to Kurakaupapa, and then the universities, and only be taught in Māori. Yeah. So it's a big change.
I'm sure it's not always easy between the Maori and the European descendants.
No, it's not. And there's a lot of talking past one another where people misunderstand. And of course, Maori are very assertive. They say, well, this is our land. You've taken our land. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to help us preserve our language? We deserve respect. And so some Pākehā, Europeans, feel, well, why should we? We're in a modern world. We should move on. English is the lingua franca of the world. Why would you want to learn Māori in 21st century New Zealand? So there's still some rather awkward conversations that take place. What's your other name?
Are you rugby players?
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe. Samoans are the biggest Pacific community in New Zealand.
We were the first to over here before the Fiji.
No, but
and now
we were the biggest community. I think now we're actually dropping.
I think we're getting less than that.
Yeah. I think if you honestly have a look at the census that came out, I think the Indians are actually overrunning everybody. Indian and then
But you're
Chinese.
still the biggest Polynesian community.
Yeah.
There's a rather unfortunate story, really, because the Pacific Islanders were brought here to work in our factories in the 1960s and 70s. And of course, most of those factories have now gone. So they came here as unskilled and semi-skilled labour. And then the reason they came here to do the sort of work they did is no longer. And so we've seen very high levels of unemployment, sometimes of poverty, educational underachievement. So one of our big challenges is making sure that new generations of Pacific peoples take part in this society in the way that they deserve. So they need to get those educational qualifications and they need to get the jobs. So that's been unfortunate. But the more recent migrants, of course, have come here as skilled migrants. So 2/3 of the migrants who come here as permanent residents come as skilled and business migrants. 23% of Aucklanders are Asian. So almost a quarter are Asian, and by far the largest group of that are from China. A large and growing group from India.
I'm from Mumbai.
Mumbai.
Oh.
How long have you been in New Zealand?
For last 7 months I've been living in New Zealand.
Have you got a job?
Yes,
Oh.
I work for Downer Engineering.
He's come as a skilled immigrant and then slotted in. The Asians came to escape something, which was crowded cities like Shanghai. They came, the main reason for coming here is the quality of life that they can get in Auckland. So a relatively nice temperate climate and a nice environment, that's really important. It's been a bit of a struggle in terms of getting jobs sometimes, because New Zealanders haven't had large Asian job seekers coming. So our employers have been a bit slow to understand this new population and to welcome them and to employ them. So that's an ongoing issue for us, really. But they really have transformed Auckland.
Whether they come from Asia, Europe, or other parts of New Zealand, people continue to flock to Auckland. But with limited space, the demographic pressure is largely responsible for the skyrocketing cost of living.
These are the old houses in Auckland, which means that they're only 100 years old. In the last 15 or 20 years, the value of some of these places has gone up by 500–600%. It's meaning that these places, a relatively modest 3-bedroom house would cost you more than $1 million. The thing that makes Auckland very expensive is that we only have about 4 million people here. So when one of our bigger shops goes to China to buy pants, they make an order of maybe 10,000 pants and they can get them for $10 each. But when H&M goes there for the United States, they'll order 20 million pants and they'll pay $1 each. So buying stuff in New Zealand costs more. For some reason, property's very inflated. And I think part of the reason property's inflated is because we're actually really close to the city, but these are reasonably sized sections. You know, these are kind of 1/4 of an acre sections a lot of the time. And there's a lot of demand to live in places like this now. For a long time, it was quite a it wasn't a very popular suburb with affluent middle-class people. And then sometime in the 1980s, people realized actually living close to town is quite convenient, and there's a lot of really beautiful heritage homes here.
Right.
So it slowly started to pick up, and most of the city fringe neighborhoods like Ponsonby began to take off in the late 80s and early 90s, and to the point now where they're unaffordable to anybody who's not earning a six-figure salary.
The real estate has gone up.
The real estate's gone crazy, but there's still pockets of extended Polynesian families who've been living here for 30 or 40 years in amongst kind of middle-class white families. But Ponsonby Road is a mix of retail and bars and cafes. It's been popular for about 15, 20 years. So this is a relatively new market. As I said, this was an old industrial building which they converted recently into this market. I think they were going to knock it down a few years ago and build apartments, but they decided to refit it and turn it into a small urban market.
Was Auckland a boring city?
Growing up here, I didn't really know any different.
Right, that's what you knew.
Yeah, I knew Auckland, and I kind of knew that way of life. And it wasn't until I went overseas to places like London and Paris that I felt like maybe it was a bit of a boring city.
You went like, okay,
yeah,
things can be done differently.
Yeah, so it just didn't kind of have a heart, if you will. Most people would commute in from the suburbs and then they would drive out in the evenings. So you didn't have this kind of nightlife in the evenings. You didn't have people socializing after work. So we noticed that lack of kind of after-work socializing, that we missed the things about living in a big city that were very dear to us. And I lived overseas for about 15 or 20 years, and in that time, we've seen quite a significant change in the way that people have pride in the city.
Is there Auckland and then the rest of New Zealand?
It depends who you ask. Whether you ask an Auckland or whether you ask somebody from the rest of New Zealand.
I'm asking an Aucklander.
I don't think so. So there is a term that sometimes gets used called Jaffa, which stands for just another Aucklander. I feel like it's more like a friendly rivalry, but I'm saying that as an Aucklander who doesn't feel that. I think there's a natural fear about a city that's very large and is an economic powerhouse, and we actually love the rest of the country. We'd like to go there to visit, we like to go there to work. It's growing faster than the rest of the country. It's becoming much more cosmopolitan. Once a city gets to a certain size, it's almost like a black hole. You know, it takes on its own gravity and it draws people to it in droves, and it becomes more successful, and then people are likely to go there because there's more jobs and more opportunity here. That's a good thing, because the alternative is that you go to Australia, where house prices and wages are 50% higher again. And so it's better that we keep people in New Zealand, even if they have to move to Auckland for those opportunities, than go to Australia.
Speaking of keeping people in New Zealand, I hear that it's just normal, almost normal, to when you're, 20 or 19, to leave the country and have an international experience.
Yeah, and I think that's partly to do with our ties with the UK. So it used to be quite easy to get a passport, like a visa to go to the UK. So people would go to London for a few years, work there and travel around Europe. We call it an OE, so an overseas experience. So yeah, I kind of traveled up and worked in the UK. And yeah, for a good length of the time I was there, I felt like this is it, I've made my home. But as you get older, that kind of anger and energy that drives you as a 20-year-old starts to soften, and your interests change a little bit, and actually the thought of going out every night didn't appeal to me so much. And I knew there were always amazing museums and bars in London, but most of the time I was at home with my wife, watching TV and making dinner at home. And I thought, well, I could be doing this anywhere in the world. I don't need to be paying crazy rent, living in a shoebox just for this experience.
And we can have the grandparents around.
And we can have the grandparents around, yeah. And so I think it's family that drives people home, and I think it's thinking about what kind of life their kids are going to have. So for me, I had a lot of friends who grew up in London and went to the kind of comprehensive schools there, and I just pictured dropping my 5-year-old at school and like packing a knife in his bag and teaching him how to use it on his first day at school, because inner city comprehensive schools in London are scary places. And then I thought about my childhood, where we spent most of the time at the beach, running around barefoot, and friends with kids who were rich and poor, and a very kind of equal, flat society. And that's I think what drives people home is the thought that they want that life for their kids. And so the things that kind of bore you as a 20-something are the things that attract you home as a 30-something starting a family.
Auckland has become a very active city. Bars and restaurants have multiplied in recent years, and Aucklanders have now developed a new desire for refinement. The nearby island of Waiheke produces a mere 1% of New Zealand's wine, yet it attracts over 700,000 tourists a year.
This is Waiheke
Yes.
Island.
Yep. Island of food, wine, fun.
Pleasure Island.
Pleasure Island, definitely. Treasure Island.
How far is it from downtown Auckland?
45 minutes on the ferry. If you've got enough money, you'll have a helicopter and you'll fly in. Yeah, most people come on the ferry. In the 1960s and 70s, people started to live here, but it was more the hippie people, so it was creative people, the potters, the artists.
They always choose the best spots.
The people who smoke dope.
Is it a very expensive destination now?
Now it is, yes. It has become it's become millionaire territory. So properties that were worth virtually very, very cheap in the 1970s are now worth millions of dollars. So if you're an Auckland millionaire and you've got too much money, you come here and you build a house. Some families come for the day, they'll have a swim at the beach, they'll take a picnic.
How big is the island?
36 square miles. We have a basic population of about 8,000 people on the island, and that can go up to 30,000 on a busy day in summer. But it is very seasonal, so in winter time, much quieter. Maybe not a bad time to come. There's always somebody open for food and wine, but definitely it's about summer on Waiheke.
This is the kind of place where some people, I'm sure, came just for the day and never left.
Yeah, everybody falls in love with Waiheke, that's the thing. When they come here, they just don't want to go home. So yeah, you're quite right.
Wine has been produced on Waiheke since 1978. And already, it is home to more than 30 wineries, including Stony Ridge, established in 1982.
Stony Ridge started 30 years ago. The first vines, those ones were planted 30 years ago by the owner of this place, Stephen White. He knew that this place was a perfect climate to grow some red varieties. It was pretty crazy because everybody on the island didn't know that we could grow good wine on these islands. Now we are producing here one of the most famous red wine in the world.
They discovered that we are about 2 degrees warmer than Auckland City, and we have light onshore breezes that dry out the humidity from the vines and things. So that's what probably Waiheke is most famous for, its red wine.
There is a sophistication in New Zealand that wasn't there before?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think you wouldn't call us sophisticated in the 1960s, would you?
What would you call yourselves?
Very basic, I think.
Okay.
And unadventurous, I think, yes. My great-grandparents came from Ireland and Denmark mainly, so...
And once they were here, they didn't move?
They just adopted the British bad food and beer. But now we can drink good wine.
And they didn't know back then that they could make some wine here?
Not really, apart from, the Catholic Church was making it. The Marist brothers, the Marist fathers and brothers were the very first to start making it. But they were sacramental wines that they made.
That was their own little secret.
Yeah, but they were good wines. So now Hawke's Bay is a premium red region, and that was where they pioneered making wine. So. I'm very proud of our wines. I think we stand up with some of the best in the world. Yeah, definitely. And our Pinot Noir is our best kept secret, so don't tell anyone.
Let's consume.
Long isolated from the rest of the world, Auckland has become a true cosmopolitan hub in little more than 20 years. With its heavenly setting, this vibrant and young city has nevertheless preserved its laid-back New Zealand vibe. Lively and entertaining, open and welcoming, Auckland is nothing short of magnificent.